Yay!
Welcome, Comadres and friends. I'm Dr. Nora de Hoyos Comstock, the national and international founder of Las Comadres para las Americas. The leadership team and I are pleased to have you join us for tonight's teleconference as we're beginning our 18th year. It's been our privilege to support Latina authors throughout these 18 years, and we look forward to many more years to come. We'd like to extend a warm welcome to readers following us on our Twitter chat at Read Latino Lit. And tonight, please help us welcome authors David Bowles and Beatriz Fritschler. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. Please keep yourselves on mute. And you may keep your videos on. Remember, some of us like to watch gallery, so we will be able to see you. Don't move too much because you'll be distracted. We do suggest, though, that you put yourself on speaker mode, and gallery allows us to see all of you who are here. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them. So now let's start with our book club's history. Comadre Tess.
Bienvenidos, comadres and friends. Our book club began in July 2004 in the apartment of Marie Frere in New York City. But after a brief pause, Nora Comstock reimagined and relaunched the organization nationwide. Her vision was to promote Latino authors, bring our community into bookstores, and support our writers. In October 2006, we began hosting teleconferences, and now in our 18th year, we continue to share works by Latino authors with book lovers everywhere. Our book club and teleconferences are designed to encourage everyone, not just Latinos, to read more Latine literature, to explore diverse cultural perspectives, and to gain deeper insights into Latine roots and heritage. We are creating an inclusive space where readers can explore the rich inner worlds of Latine writers through their written word. We currently have book clubs in 12 cities across different time zones, and we invite you to join your local chapter. If you don't see one represented in your area, why don't you start one? We welcome your help in starting a new club in any city that you would like. For more information, visit our website at latnet.com. So spread the word and invite others to join us. Take it away, Karen.
Welcome, comadres and friends, to our January 2025 Zoom teleconference. I'm Karen Gonzalez, Assistant Coordinator for the Las Comadres and Friends Book Club, Denver Comadres Book Club Facilitator, and co-founder of the Colorado Alliance of Latino Mentors and Authors. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our first interview is with David Bowles, a Mexican-American author and translator from South Texas. Among his multiple award-winning titles are The Sea-Ringed World, Sacred Stories of the Americas, Feathered Serpent, Dark Heart of Sky, Myths of Mexico, Flower, Song and Dance, Aztec and Maya Poetry, Ancient Night, and The Prince and the Coyote. David presently serves as the Vice President of the Texas Institute of Letters. Interviewing David is Ruth E. Quiroa, PhD and Associate Professor at National Louis University, where she teaches graduate youth literature courses. Her research focuses on the history of Latinx youth literature, and she has served as a committee member for multiple U.S. Children's Literature Awards, including the Americas, Pura, Belpré, Randolph Caldecott, and Jane Addams Awards. Take it away, Comadre Ruth.
Gracias and bienvenidos a todos. David, I remember sitting across the table from you last summer when we were having the Pura Belpré Awards receptions, and it's such a great privilege to have the opportunity to talk about The Prince and the Coyote with you today. For me, historical fiction is one of my favorite genres, and your book is such a rich historical fiction text, and I only hope that we have enough time for you to do it justice today, because 25 minutes goes fast.
The good thing is I talk really fast.
Okay. I'll try to talk faster too. So first, can you slowly pronounce your protagonist's name for the audience and for me? Because it is hard for me to pronounce quickly, and I don't think I have it right. And I know we'll be saying it a lot in this chat.
Yeah. It's one of the things that I love about doing this work. So his name is Nezahualcoyotl. So Nezahualcoyotl. In Mexican Spanish, a lot of people are used to it because there are people that literally have that name, and there is a borough of Mexico City that's Nezahualcoyotl. But yeah, it's Nezahual and then Coyote. It's easier.
Okay, and how do I say that again?
I would say don't worry about the TL, just pronounce it like a T. You can either pronounce it like a T or an L. In fact, what's really interesting is, there are 20 something different variants of Nahuatl that are spoken today by 1.5 million people. And in some of them, the TL has changed into an L, and in some it's changed into a T. So you literally will be pronouncing it right in somebody's dialect of Nahuatl. If you
Good for
say
me.
Nezahualcoyotl and just like that, or Nezahualcoyotl, because that TL sound at the end is really hard. It's a combination of a T and an L, literally, and so it's like that, and not the easiest thing for people to say. So I'd
Right.
say don't stress. Just don't say it like oddle. Don't say
Oh, yeah.
so yeah,
So I'll
Nezahualcoyotl.
try it, and then we'll go on to the
And
story.
his name is really interesting since we're talking about it. Nezahual is it's a compound name. Nezahual comes from Nezahuali, and this is a collar that Nahuas before the Spanish invasion would wear around their neck, a paper collar with like little white streamers hanging down that would indicate to people that they were fasting. It was a way of saying, "Don't offer me food, don't talk to me. I'm in the midst of meditation and prayer and fasting." And then the word coyote, which means coyote, obviously. And so it's like a coyote with a fasting collar around its neck. And so it's often translated as hungry coyote or fasting coyote. And it's a really lovely name that speaks to like the spiritual values of Nezahualcóyotl as well as his prowess as a warrior and his gift as a poet.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that before. So when and where did you learn Nahuatl? And 15th century Nahuatl is different than modern
And modern,
Nahuatl.
yeah.
Like you said, there's 1.5 million people in central Mexico. How did you get into it? What made you interested in which type of modern or ancient did you start with?
Yeah, sure. So, I really got interested in it, like a lot of Mexican Americans, especially the ones of us who are the first to go to college. When I got into college and realized that a lot of things about my familia, my comunidad, had been kind of like erased over time, our indigenous heritage and all these things, I kind of like really doubled down on like wanting to know more and wanting to know the roots of all the like leyendas and other types of folklore that I had heard from my abuela and from my tios, how, where it came from and what the roots were in Mexico. And these kinds of studies of like digging deeper and deeper brought me to realize that my dad's side of the family came into this area about 250 years ago with Escandon when what's now Mexico was New Spain. And, the kind of like the edge of it was around the Saltillo area in Coahuila. And they wanted to push all the way up to the river. And so this governor who had been a general and so forth, Escandon, took families out of Saltillo and from the neighboring indigenous community, which was Tlaxcalteca, it's a type of Nahua, and took them north with him to settle what's now northern Mexico and South Texas, where I live, right? So the towns of Camargo and Mier and Reynosa, Laredo, um, on the southern side of the bank and some of on the northern side. And so for a while, I discovered alongside Spanish and the other like indigenous languages of the Coahuiltecan people, Nahuatl was spoken in this region. It was kind of like a missionary language that was used to try to make Catholicism more palatable to indigenous people when Spanish colonizers came across them. And the Tlaxcalteca, they had been the enemies of the Aztecs, right? Of the Mexica and the rest of the people in their empire. So when they helped the Spanish overthrow Tenochtitlan, they became, like super faithful allies and would go all over the country helping with these different attempts to set up missions and to colonize and so forth. Which is, like everybody wants their ancestors to be like Mexica warriors, and it's always kind of like, oh wow, yeah, my indigenous ancestors were the collaborators. Oh wow. It makes you want to hang your head, but it still was fascinating. And that made me want to know more about Nahuatl. And there were a couple of people that were playing around with Nahuatl. Gloria Ansaldúa, who was just from right up the road from where I live right now, was playing around with it in her work, in some of her philosophical terminology, like Netantla and so forth. And Francisco X Alarcón, great poet, was using Nahuatl in his poetry and writing poems in Nahuatl and translating from it. And just as I studied more, I just, became like really, really enamored of it. By that point, I'm kind of an unusual person. I grew up bilingual, speaking English and Spanish, but I also, because I went to a religious school for a while, I studied like biblical Greek and Hebrew when I was like in fifth grade, and went on to study like Latin, and then like fell in love with like French and even Japanese. So by the time I came to Nahuatl, I'd studied a whole bunch of different languages, and it was a lot easier for me because, to be honest with you, it's at the time, late 90s, early 2000s, it wasn't very easy to find, like, you couldn't, if you live in South Texas, you can't just like go down to the local school and say, sign me up for Nahuatl classes. There's nothing like that, right?
Absolutely.
So I had to like learn on my own. And I definitely I went with for like what we call classical Nahuatl, or Nahuatl Nahuatl, or Tenochca Nahuatl, the language that was spoken at the time of the conquest, because I wanted to read the manuscripts that had been written by Nahua people right after the Spanish came, and they acquired the Roman alphabet and were able to use it to write things down in their language,
Right, right.
using it phonetically. And so that was definitely what I studied. But there are a lot of modern variants of Nahuatl that are very similar to classical Nahuatl, and so I've like continued to like study some of those as well, especially the ones that are kind of like around Mexico City, to the south and to the south east of Mexico City. Those versions, those variants of Nahuatl are very similar still.
Okay, wow. What a story. That is really neat. So now I'm curious about, let's see if I can say it, Nezahualcóyotl.
Coyo.
Oh,
Yeah,
uh-huh.
Nezahualcoyotl. Yeah.
Nezahualcoyotl.
Yeah.
And so what was it about him? I mean, I've read before and I've heard you before that you actually found some of his poems there. Yeah, and he's on the money. And
Yeah.
so
It's like
tell us
that's where the
about
first.
why him. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the very first poem that I ever read by him is like on the 100 peso bill. I'm not gonna. It's translated into Spanish right there. I wish we all had poetry on our money. Wouldn't it be cool? Like the
Yeah,
dollar.
that would be nice. It
That
might
was,
make us nicer.
and capitalism a little more palatable. Like, oh, I'm spending money, but I get to read a poem. Um, it's this great poem about it starts amo el canto del cenzontle. Like, I love the song of the mockingbird, bird of 400 voices. It's this kind of iteration of things that the poet loves, like beauty in the world, and it ends with, but more than all these lovely things, I love my fellow human beings. And there was just something about that sentiment, like this very humanistic way of looking at the world in the mouth of somebody from the early 1400s that intrigued me. And as I began to study things and learn more about them, I learned I I should have learned about Nezahualcoyotl when I was a student in schools along the border in South Texas that were predominantly Mexican American, with Mexican American teachers. But of course, that wasn't the case, and it still is not the case. He is one of the only indigenous poets whose poetry has survived, and that we know that he's the one, it's ascribed to him. His name is associated with the poems. They were written down right after the conquest. And he was also like an engineer and a statesman and all of these different things. He was one of the founders of the Triple Alliance that we call the Aztec Empire. He built the dike that separated the briny from the sweet water in Lake Texcoco. He built the aqueduct that brought water from Chapultepec Hill down into Tenochtitlan. He was something like an amazing guy. But one of the most compelling things about him when I was reading his poetry was some of it was just so achingly like mournful, like in the middle of existential crises, like I wish I had never been born. You know, life is miserable. I have no place in this world. I don't belong anywhere. And a lot of his poetry was written when he was a teenager. And so I was like, how does a teen, you know, I was a teenager with a lot of like, emotions, and my dad like abandoned my family, and I know what it's like to be without a father, like he was without a father, but he was without a father because he was the crown prince of a city state called Texcoco. And it was like the main city in this kind of confederation or alliance of city states on the eastern shore of Lake Texcoco that was called um, Acolhuacan. And Acolhuacan was they prided themselves on being the inheritors of the Toltec tradition, like the really elegant, like we would think of like the Greco-Roman kind of tradition, but also the Chichimeca tradition, this like warrior barbarian. They were a blend of the two. And his mother was not from that culture at all. She was Mexica from Tenochtitlan. She was a princess of the house of Acamapichli. And so he was kind of like between worlds. He was part Acolhuan, part Mexica, but there was an empire on the other side of the lake that invaded and killed his father, and so he had to go on the run. And you know, it's just fascinating that you know, his city has been taken over. A lot of his people have been pushed into exile over the mountains in interesting Tlaxcalan, because we were just talking about the Tlaxcalteca. So they were in that the land of these people that would later be the Mexica's enemies. And he just wrote a lot of poetry about like what it meant to be alone. Because he, in order to elude his captors, he went up into the mountains, the two volcanoes that we know next to Mexico City, Iztaccíhuatl, the dormant one that looks like a woman on her back covered with snow, and Popocatépetl, which a lot of people know has been exploding a lot in recent years, right? It's a very active volcano. And so he spent the better part of a year hiding up in those mountains and just thinking about like what he was going to do next. And that thing, that being somebody in between, somebody without a father, a teenager who is a mix of different ethnicities, is in between worlds, and who has to make a decision about what to do with his talent. All of that really resonated with me and made me want to know more about him, and eventually brought me to want to write about his story.
Well, that is quite an epic, complex story, and some people might have taken it and run with it as a biography. And you chose to create this sort of epic, I can imagine it as a movie, an epic, complex historical fiction text. Can you tell everyone here about how you went from, you went from Nahuatl, did you go to Spanish or English? And then you had to select a genre. Could you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that process?
Sure. I mean, sure, it's definitely really tricky, and there are lots of bizarre choices along the way. One of the things that kept me from wanting to make it a biography is that in the first place, the information that we know about him is scarce enough that it would be very difficult to make a very substantial biography. You could, you know, there have been scholarly books written about his life, and they I won't say they pad things out, but a lot of the length of it is just an examination of the sources and extrapolation and trying to, you know, understand, because most of the stuff was written down after the Spanish had invaded, what things, what details about Nezahualcoyotl's life may have been made up just to appease the Spanish. Because Texcoco didn't want to have happen to them what happened to Tenochtitlan when it was razed completely to the ground, right? And nearly every Mexica killed. They were like, yeah, let's avoid that. So it was in their best interest to make Nezahualcoyotl be kind of like a prefiguration of a Christian. They wanted him to be like really, you know, upright and have a morality that aligned with Catholic morality, and they, you know, wanted him to have worship this mysterious like monotheistic God and so forth. And a lot of those things, scholars, as they've researched and kind of, you know, filtered all these things through scientific lenses have discarded as very unlikely. And so we do have a core understanding of who he must have been and what he must have done, but it's just not enough information to write a biography about. And so you kind of have to use the tools of historical fiction. One of the things that I was aided with was, though, that I had been studying pre-Columbian Mesoamerica for a very long time. And so I knew a lot about what life was like for a teenager during the early 1400s, what school would have been like for him, what expectations would have been from society. And, a lot of that stuff is preserved in this really like long document that's 12 volumes called usually called the Florentine Codex, which is kind of an ethnography about
Right.
written down by Nawa informants who were the children and grandchildren of people who had ruled over that area. And so, being extrapolating from that, helped me to pad out his life and to speculate, like, given these things that we know about him, what can then speculate he would have probably been like young, when we know what he was like when he was an adult, what would he have been like when he was younger that would have carried through? How can I see like an arc, a trajectory? Um, and one of those things was, he didn't get married until the very end of his life, although he had a whole lot of lovers and concubines, and he was given a nickname that had to do with like sexual prowess, I guess we will say. And because of that, I wanted to play a little around as a queer man myself, as a pansexual Latino. I wanted to give him a pansexual identity as well, which does seem to fit pretty well with the facts as we have them, so that we could bring in people into the story, the fictional creations I make, that would get to tell the story of people whose stories were not preserved by the Spanish after that they would have never preserved the stories of non-binary people, of trans people, and so forth. And I wanted to be sure to include that in there. So one of the main characters is Nezahualcoyotl's childhood kind of like mentor, babysitter, whatever, and then later advisor, slightly older than him, Xochihua. Xochihua is a word that means one who possesses the flower, and we don't have a good equivalent for it in English now, but it was basically somebody who was assigned male at birth, but whose gender and sexual orientation kind of defied that. So they could either be trans women or non-binary or queer in some way that we would recognize as queer. They terms the same way. So I mean, using historical fiction allowed me to bring that kind of stuff in as well, and to tell like the story of the rise of the Aztec Empire as well as the Triple Alliance, and get to do a lot more than just tell his story, but talk about philosophy, and things like that. So I mean, it was definitely the kinds of tools that I wanted to use.
That's wow. Every time I hear you talk about this, I learn so many more things. Did you have a hard, so because you had that did you have to, when you were originally researching, probably not specifically for this, did you have to get special permissions? Where did you go to find your sources that you were reading that led you eventually to this path? I know you said, is it 10 years you'd been studying sort of that time period and those texts and things? Yeah.
Sure, sure. I mean, because think about my work, some of my earlier stuff, like Feather Serpent, Dark Heart of Sky, that took me like 6 or 7 years to write, and that was 6 or 7 years on top of nearly a decade of research. I mean, at this point right now, Ruth, I've spent about 20 years learning Nahuatl and researching pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, whatever. So whenever I write something, I'm pulling from all of that research that I've done. And so, yeah, I mean, you'd be surprised. A lot of things are accessible, but they might be accessible in Spanish translation only, or in the original Nahuatl, in like photographic form or whatever. Only occasionally have I had to like go down to Mexico City and one of my friends who are professors at UNAM to help me, get in to see documents. For the most part, you can find nearly everything now published or online, it's really, really great.
That's beautiful. I know my husband's also looked at the works in Guatemala, similar time period, and you do keep finding more things. even hidden in Chicago sometimes at the Newberry Library. You just never know where you're going to find them.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And so I see we're getting closer to time, but I want to bring it to the present. Well, first, have you been approached yet about a movie? I would love to see a movie of this book. It's so epic. I mean, it
Yeah,
was
yeah. I mean, trust me. I mean, because I work, I do consulting with different, production companies and
right,
in
right.
studios, something like that. I'm always looking for ways to make it happen, but it hasn't been optioned yet or anything like that.
Okay.
I don't know. People who are listening may not realize that, but I was like heavily involved in what was going to be this miniseries called Mexica that would have featured Tenoch Huerta playing Moctezuma and Javier Bardem as Cortez. The sets had been built in Xochimilco. I had translated the script written by an Oscar-winning screenwriter into Nahuatl and Spanish. I was going to be on set, doing dialect coaching and so forth, and then COVID hit. So,
Oh,
I've been in the midst of like things almost happening, and hopefully it will again. But
right.
um, definitely that's something we would love to see, and
Yes.
it would be great because I think there's relevance to Nezahualcoyotl to kind of like jump into a question that you had kind of had at the end
Right,
there.
right. The next
Yeah,
one,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, there's a relevance, I think, for people today about Nezahualcoyotl's life, about being in a politically conflicted moment, being like a really talented young person whose identity is kind of like fluid and they're trying to figure themselves out, but they also have to rise to the challenge of the moment. Nezahualcoyotl, like the main debate in him throughout the entire book, it's kind of like the Bhagavad Gita. If anybody's like Buddhist or has read Hindu or Buddhist texts, the Bhagavad Gita is like, what's his name? Oh my God, I can't believe I can't remember her name. Sitting on the battlefield and trying to decide, do I fight or do I not fight? And that's what Nezahualcoyotl's got to do. Does he, because Nezahualcoyotl is a name he takes for himself, right? His name is Acolmisli, and he takes the name Nezahualcoyotl as a new identity. And he's got to decide, what do I do with this identity? Do I just become a commoner? Do I become a farmer? Do I live like a simple life? Or do I take back my country and bring my people out of exile? And because he loves music and art and composition and stuff like that, he'd really rather not go around killing people, but he has to. There's no way for him to be able to reclaim his heritage and save, the tens of thousands of his people that are in exile, except for him to take up weapons and fight. And it is, I think, not to put too fine a point on it, but it's a dilemma that a lot of us come up against. It's a call to action. It's like recognize the moment you're in, find what you're able to do to fight back against tyranny, and make a stand for the people that you find community with. And I think in that way, it would resonate with a lot of people. And then all the issues of like gender identity and orientation, these are all things that the guy
There's
falls in love
love,
lots of
there's,
times in the book.
yeah. Yeah. So how would you get, there are so many ways to mine this book in the young adult realm. How would you recommend for teachers to maybe think about how to approach this, to provide the background knowledge? Um, are there
Yeah, I
any
mean, definitely.
tips you would give? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely like within some sort of unit where you're using it alongside other texts.
Mm.
I know that uh, Professor Carrie Thomas, who does a lot of really amazing work, has created a teacher's guide where she uses it alongside Sanjay Patel's Ramayana, the Divine Loophole, which is like a modern take on the Hindu epic, the Ramayana, and she does that kind of thing where you take like the world epics that people are familiar with and you use this comparatively with that. So I think it helps to use it to hold it in comparison with or in conversation with texts that kids might be a little more familiar with. But it can also be read uh, with like different types of critical lenses, like queer lens and so forth, to kind of like get at some of the complexities in the story. But also, it's just a rip-roaring like epic that a lot of kids will get into just because of the thing. And one thing we haven't mentioned yet is that it's written in prose and in poetry, and there literally is the poetry of Nezahualcoyotl in in the book that I've translated from Nahuatl into English and then tried to write more poetry in that voice. And so you can also use it um, in like a poetry unit. You could pull from it to talk about poetry and so forth. So
And sometimes that poetry format is a little bit more accessible to kids who might struggle with other kinds of reading. And so you've given so much for readers, and now we need everybody to use it. That's why I asked if there's a movie, because I knew if it's coming out as a movie, that everybody will be reading it.
oh
To
my
me,
gosh,
it
yeah.
should be
Well,
on every reading list, every summer program, library, high school reading list. Uh, uh,
absolutely.
so
Well,
what are you working on now? Are you working on anything else this epic?
well, I mean, you know, I've my book with Guadalupe Garcia McCall that just came out last year, Hearts of Fire and Snow. Literally, speaking of the volcanoes, it's like a retelling of the legend of volcanoes, of the warrior Popocatsin who fell in love with Iztac, and then you know she thought he was dead, and she killed herself. Then he comes back and he takes her up, and they become volcanoes. So it's like a retelling of that, and also a sequel to it. So it's kind of like Toltec mythology in modern day, almost like a kind of like Twilighty reincarnation thing going on at a Reno, Nevada high school. That's pretty epic. But yeah, no, I continue working. I'm working on a novel about Erendira, the first indigenous person to mount to lead a mounted resistance against the Spanish, against any European power. She was a Purépecha princess who, as a teenager, you know, trained a horse, learned to ride it, and then stole a bunch of other horses from the Spanish and led a resistance. So it's there's some amazing stories, and I'm actually doing a lot more historical fiction. So I've got multiple projects like that. I've got a book about the Manila Galleon that brought you know, thousands and thousands of Asians into the Americas, into New Spain, and it talks about the first Chinatown in the Americas, which was the Barrio San Juan in La Ciudad de Mexico in the early 1600s, where 100,000 Asian people lived, most of them Filipino, but also lots of Chinese and Japanese and Indian and other people from that area. It's a really, really fascinating story, and they shaped Mexican culture in ways that people don't realize until they start like studying it, and then they're like, oh wow, that is from Asia. Oh, that's Chinese. Oh, that's Indian, because there's a lot of that. So, kind of stuff I'm working on right now.
Well, we have hit our time, and I want to leave enough time for our next set of our next author. And so thank you so much. I wish I could just read all day.
Thanks,
Oh,
Ruth. It's been a
thank
pleasure
you.
talking to you.
Thank
Thanks.
you. It's always nice to talk to you. Thank you.
Okay, gracias, compadre y comadre. Our second interview is with Beatriz Fritschler. Her memoir, Embody Joy, A Woman's Journey of Reconnection with Her Body, chronicles her extraordinary journey from her Dominican roots to overcoming the challenges of immigrant life in New York City. With vulnerability and strength, she shares her story of resilience, including surviving a ruptured brain aneurysm that transformed her view of health, purpose, and joy. Beatriz's story is not only a personal triumph, but a celebration of community and advocacy. As a social impact leader and founder of Executive Losers, she champions wellness, social justice, and empowerment for others, making Embody Joy a powerful, transformative read for anyone seeking inspiration and hope. Interviewing Beatriz is Dr. Damari Bonilla Rodriguez, a published author and national leader in diversity-focused leadership development. With a background in Spanish, social work, organizational communications, and a doctorate in executive leadership, she actively contributes to diverse leadership initiatives. Recognized for her media features and written work, including her new book, Modern Marianismo, its relevance and the connection to imposter syndrome and perfectionism. Dr. Bonilla Rodriguez is also a devoted mother of 14-year-old twins, Caleb and Joshua. She resides in Pennsylvania with her husband and sons. Take it away, Comadre Damari.
Gracias, comadre. Thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful. And what an amazing opportunity to start off the week with all of you. And it is mi honor y orgullo to have the opportunity to interview Beatriz because I have followed her journey on social media. We were connected before I moved to Pennsylvania a long time ago, and we've stayed connected that way. And I want to be transparent and tell you all that she's going to be on the spot. I didn't send her any questions in advance because I wanted her to give just her raw thoughts on some of the topics that I picked out from her book. So Beatriz, thank you for trusting me, and also for just being the genuine person that you are and sharing so publicly. And I want to kick off with the realization that a memoir is so personal, right? You have to be transparent in this way. And so I'd like for you to kick us off with, why did you feel compelled to tell your story, and who can be impacted by your story?
Well, thank you so much, Damari. And I wrote down the name of your new book, so I'm going to look into it because there's a lot of Marianismo in my book. I think, in any Latina story, there's a lot of Marianismo. I always had a fantasy of writing a book. I didn't know what that book was going to be. And then life happened. And I guess I experienced my heroine story, mi historia de heroína. And I have gotten to such a wonderful place with my body and my health that I wanted to use my own personal story to illustrate how I got there. And, sometimes when we talk about the body, it feels a little, I still feel this feeling and I'm still battling it. It feels a little shallow, but I will tell you, there's no prayer or ritual that have helped me get more connected to the divine than the ritual of caring for my body. I didn't realize that the way to get closest to God was to take care of this beautiful home that God created for me.
Gracias, Beatriz. And it truly is a heroine story. There are so many amazing snippets that I learned from the book about your journey, a lot more than I even believed I knew, right? And so one of the things that I love is that you share that body journey and getting to the point of understanding that this is about you. Like, that's what I'm hearing you say. So I want to start with your younger story, right? You talk about your parents' divorce in the book, which is something that can destroy you, or you grow from it. And so when you talk about being the first family that was going through divorce, being looked at differently in terms of, the church, one thing that really stood out with me was when you said that your mother was known as the wife of El Doctor Mieses, right? Like this was her identity, if you will. Can you share what are the cultural and religious implications from that divorce journey?
Well, it was really difficult. And, as any little girl, my mom was, my role model, my hero. It was really hard. From all the families in our neighborhood, we moved in a community, and you get to learn a little bit about that at the beginning of the book. It was all new homes, so it was all new homeowners, young families with kids around the same age. I'm still friends with all the girls that I grew up with. And we were all up in each other's business, as the small communities are. And when my parents got divorced, it was, it sent some waves. There were no other families experiencing what we were experiencing. On top of that, my family was evangelical Christian. My grandfather was a Methodist minister. And that was even more strange in the religious community that we were part of. And as the descendants of the minister, we were also supposed to be an example. So it was really challenging, and you are correct. My mom was from a small town in Dominican Republic. She moved to the city to marry El Doctor Mieses. So she came to the city to embrace the status as being the partner of this respected symbol in the community, and all that was shaken when the divorce happened.
When you said, when you started talking about it, sent waves, and then all that was shaken, and there's so much emotion that still comes up. And I'm thinking that when you're discussing first experiences, it brings us back to the place of those tough steps in our journey, right? And there's so much. I even have goosebumps as I'm looking at my note about the next piece, but there's so much in chapter 5 where you share your experience as a factory worker. And I mean, so much of your story relates to what a lot of people still are going through, right? And so you talk about physical and emotional challenges, which many factory workers are still experiencing in our United States workforce currently. My grandfather was a factory worker, right? So that just brought up a lot of things. And you describe it so vividly, where on page 59, you said, quote, "the loud clanging of metal," unquote. It's the experience that's so embedded that you remember the sounds and the smells. And I want you to just talk to us a little bit about, how you navigated those challenges and what it did for you in terms of where you are today.
So when I moved to the US, I was 19. I'm actually celebrating 30 years this March that I've been in this country. It's crazy that I've been here much longer than I was in the Dominican Republic. I was 19. I basically started working almost a week after I moved to the US. I was lucky that my aunt's husband helped me get a job. I came to the US after my parents' second divorce. My mom moved to the US to be with her family and to create distance between her and my dad. So my parents got divorced, remarried, divorced. So she moved to the US to create distance, and I felt responsible. I was able to get a job before my mom did. And I felt, I need to buckle down, get this done. But it was a very shocking experience. I won't lie. I came from a privileged, comfortable life in Santo Domingo, educated, middle-class family, and coming to work in a factory and being treated as, as a machine, basically, and being disrespected. And even though I had documentation, there were many undocumented people in the factory, and seeing how, their immigration status was used to threaten them, really had an impact on me. And I owe my whole career in social impact, social services, to those 2 years that I spent in the factory, because I could be nothing but empathetic. I could be nothing but empathetic to what people were facing there. And like I said, I had papers. I went to college at night while working during the day. I had a way out, but not everybody did. And that's why I committed my life to this work.
Thank you for that. And I want to dig in a little bit more, because in that section of the book, you talk about so many new experiences, right? So living in a new country, and I'm glad that we're getting to hear those bits and pieces, and it's kind of, weaving together as we're chatting. New country, new language. You learned about a new disorder, right, with Edwin, and so I'll give that to you to kind of walk us through. But how do these experiences shift your mindset? And you talked about where you are now in terms of, or where you've been in terms of your journey, but how does it shift your mindset that, yes, I'm here in the struggle, but these new experiences are really stretching me, right? So how do you go from the negativity of the 1-bedroom apartment, the darkness that you describe, compared to, right, a new home and the, the better experiences, that kind of wrapped up with first Broadway play, and I'll let you tell us which one it is. And it took me back to going to Broadway when I was in New York, and just the other day I was saying to my husband, we're gonna get to a Broadway play. And so there's just so many new things that can be negative, but you've always turned everything into a positive. So just kind of talk us through some of that.
Well, I think by nature, I'm a relentless optimist. So I always have believed that behind every challenge, there's a lesson, there's something good to come out of it. And life has shown me that sometimes the bigger the struggle, the bigger the blessing. I don't know. I just, whatever was thrown at me, I just tried to face it with this the strongest way possible and take on the challenge and move on. I don't know why God has given me that attitude, but yeah, I always found the opportunity to, you know, see the challenge, see it as a growth experience, and also see the blessings in everything that's around me. Like I said, you know, the factory was challenging, but I had a job a week after moving into this country. Not everybody has that opportunity. I found a community college half an hour away from the factory where I could go and take English classes. And so every challenge had an opportunity to match it. And you were asking, I don't know if you want me to go into the Broadway play.
Yeah, go for it. Tell us
well,
which one.
so
Tell them which one.
Les Miserables. That was my first Broadway play. It was a very interesting thing. When I worked in the factory, there was this cute boy that from day one I saw him, and you know when you see somebody, doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, but you connect with somebody and you know this person is gonna be in my life for a long time or for a reason. This person means something. So it was probably like 6 months before he even had a real conversation with me or asked me on a date, but he had that impact in me, and I will see him coming into work every day. And when he eventually asked me out, he was trying to be coy. He said something like, I have these tickets, would you like to come with me? Because some, you know, a young guy in his 20s just happens to have Broadway tickets in his pocket, you know. Anyway, and it was wonderful to be in the middle of Times Square and to go see a Broadway show. It is the images that you see in movies before you even come to the US, and me being front and center, having that experience, you know, going from the factory to a Broadway show. It just shows you that there's more to life out there. And my life, to be honest, has been full of that contrast. I have seen a lot of poverty in my life. I have seen a lot of wealth in my life. I have seen the challenges and the opportunities again on both ends. And I'm grateful for having that, you know, well-rounded perspective and experience of the world.
I love that. I couldn't have planned it better for you to say from the factory to Broadway, right? Because I think that that is a good example of your life. And when you were talking about your parents, you know, the divorce, the remarriage, right? We left it at divorce, and then you hear, wait, they got remarried. Oh, I really have to read this. You know, there are so many people that have that experience, and it brings up lots of different feelings, right? Because you feel like you're in the middle. And then you're happy that they're back together. You were sad that they got divorced, right? So how did you use that back and forth experience in your parents' relationship and marriage dynamic to inform your own relationships?
Well, I don't know if I was very conscious, but I'll like you said, the back and forth. Actually, I'm the oldest child. So I felt a huge sense of responsibility, keeping the peace between my mom and dad. My father married somebody else. I have two siblings. From my father's other wife, my stepmother, and mi madrastra. So I became the peacekeeper, the negotiator, the person that kept everybody happy. I don't know if I brought a lot of that into my first marriage. I was very young. I got married at 21, my first time. So I was a baby. And when I look at 21-year-olds right now, I'm like, what was I thinking? But yeah, what does experience? it showed me was, I guess, how to negotiate a little bit of codependency, a lot of people pleasing that I'm still working on. But it gave me interpersonal skills that I can leverage now. I know how to negotiate in a room, how to get along with everybody. May not have come from the healthiest place, but I can leverage it now.
No, I love it. And that's why I'm glad that you shared that you were the oldest. I'm the oldest sister as well. And you do carry so much responsibility. And, you know, that's where that Marianismo piece comes in, right, for you and your experience. So move that to your relationship with Charles. And you talk about, you know, there are positive aspects and also there's some challenging aspects, right, that comes up when you think about your relationship, when you think about your body. I've been an observer, right, of watching, you know, your journey of when you redid your closet and got rid of your clothes and went shopping, and you know, so I've seen some of the emotions that you've shared, but there's also some you probably haven't shared that you write about. So tell us a little bit about that.
I'm trying to connect the ones I haven't. Maybe I can share everything. It's been interesting. In my second marriage, my husband Charles, he's very confident. He's very direct. The last name, the Fritschler, is a German descent. I think that's a German thing, to be very direct. If you don't want to know what he's thinking, don't ask him. So it was a big challenge for me. The people pleasing tendencies, we had a lot of issues at the beginning because, you know, I will not be authentic. I will just say what he wanted to hear, what I thought, what he wanted to hear. I was assuming what he wanted to hear. And I built a lot of resentment throughout the relationship because I'm sacrificing all these things and doing everything he wants, and he doesn't see that. And eventually, when we got to communicate about it, I learned that he never knew that I was sacrificing and not doing what I wanted to do, because if he doesn't want to do something, he doesn't do it, period, the end. So he assumed that I was doing what I wanted to do. So, you know, it's been definitely a growth journey to be in relationship with somebody like that. It has gotten me to a wonderful point that now I can see some of the fears and anxieties from my family as an observer, no longer as triggers. And when it comes to my body journey, he was by my side when I had the aneurysm rupture. He was an amazing support. And also our relationship, he's very physically active. So I basically, we have a 24-year age difference. He's 24 years older than me. But I was older than him when we met. I actually had to get in shape to keep up with my older man because he likes to go hiking, cycling, all that stuff. So my health journey has also helped connect us more and get into more adventures together. We were ice skating on Saturday. Yeah.
I love it. So yes, Dr. Ruth, you're right. Time flies when you're having fun with the amazing authors. So let's go into that piece, because you talked about the aneurysm and we cannot close this out without touching on that. So in the book, you talk about the deep connection between your health, emotional well-being, social environments. I know that culture and your religious upbringing and relationships, all of what we've touched on and a lot more that's in your book that we can't touch on have played a role, right, in all of those aspects. And so on page 109, where you dig into this area, you were talking about being in a group therapy session and sharing with your therapist and your peers this deep wish, right? And you said, quote, "I want to become more open-minded and develop deeper connections with others," right? And then you say, "Well, God heard me loud and clear. And it seems he took my words quite literally." And we'll skip down. I remember you posting this and you said, it was as if God was saying, "You want to be open-minded? Let's start with cracking your head open." And I have goosebumps because this is what leads us to the aneurysm. And you talk about the experience of the aneurysm from a numbers perspective, that there are 5 risk factors: a woman of color, over age 40, someone with high blood pressure, and a recent history of alcohol abuse. 2 aneurysms, 1 ruptured and 1 unruptured, 2 brain surgeries, and 20 days in the neurological ICU. A 60% mortality rate for those who experience a rupture. Of those who survive, approximately 66% endure some form of permanent neurological deficits. And there's a lot more. But I want you to share just your raw emotion when you hear someone reading that part of your story.
That me surviving, me coming out intact, the paperwork, I look at it from time to time, this charge paper said cognitively and physically intact, were an absolute miracle. That in those 20 days, I experienced the most love I ever experienced in my life. Thank God it didn't happen during COVID. I got so much love. I had hundreds of visitors and people just praying for me in every single area of my life. And yeah, it took to have my head cracked open, to connect with my body, to connect to the divine, and to connect with myself.
So again, that theme of the challenge and then the contrast of the positivity. Well, to close us out, share a quote with us, please, that inspires you, and I will mute myself, and then Comadre Tess can take it from there.
Oh my God, a quote. I'll pull one from the book.
Perfect. There's so many good ones.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to, sorry, I'm being slow. I guess I'll do the first one because the White Ruffle Panties chapter is my favorite. And now I have a grown-up version of them. Every girl should know the joy of being comfortable in her own skin. It's a foundation for a lifetime of confidence and strength. Rigoberta Menchú.
Wow, thank you so much. We extend really our heartfelt gratitude to our authors and their publishers, and Levine Querido and Beatriz Fritschler for generously donating books to our early registrants. Special thanks to our incredible interviewers, Dr. Ruth Quiroa and Dr. Damary Bonilla Rodriguez. Both of you asked such insightful questions and help us to get to the real kernel of knowledge and joy in these books. Thank you so much for that. We appreciate our audience for joining us tonight and submitting thoughtful questions. Most importantly, we want to recognize our dedicated volunteers, without whom this book club and its associated work would not be possible. Mil gracias. Supporting Latino authors is critical to our mission. We encourage you to write reviews on platforms like Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, as these reviews significantly impact publishers and potential readers. And definitely publishers, so it becomes really important that they know that we're reading these books. Consider purchasing books to directly support our authors, and if your local library lacks a title you're interested in, please don't hesitate to request that they order it. And we invite you to attend our virtual local book club meetings and bring I lost my place. And bring friends along. We invite you to attend our virtual local book clubs and bring friends along. Remember, our book club is inclusive. It's open to men and women, Latinos and non-Latinos alike. Looking ahead, our February 2025 books are Birds of 400 Voices by Eugene Rodriguez, Like Happiness by Ursula Villarreal Mura. Thank you for your continued support of Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club. By buying books and supporting Latino authors, you help celebrate and amplify diverse literary voices throughout the year. Buenas noches, and always read Latino Lit.
Buenas noches.